Good morning and welcome to this session on the 10 practical things you can do to address the financial challenges faced by sixth forms. Now these are in no particular order, but the first one, make sure you have the right students on the right course. It sounds obvious, but we have this period prior to the October census when we can move students around from course to course without it impacting on our funding. But after the October census, if we are going to make changes, we need to make sure we transfer rather than withdraw and re-enroll the students. It does the same thing in the end, but the way that the data is calculated, it will have an impact. And remember, as long as the student remains on one of their core learning aims, it doesn't impact on the retention funding that you receive as a school. So it's better to keep a student on 1A level or 1AS rather than asking them to leave. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, surely this doesn't matter because qualification success rate reports have now gone, so we're not looking at course level data. And that's absolutely right. However, qualification achievement rate reports will be introduced in the coming years, and this measure will be part of that report. Make sure you know that the qualifications are still approved for funding. Qualifications have to be approved by Ofqual, but that doesn't mean they're approved for the purposes of funding. And we know this to be the case. Things like critical thinking, general studies, and some of the vocational qualifications such as food hygiene, health and safety are all approved qualifications. However, they are not fundable. If you want to check, you need to search for the qualification by aim number using the Schedule 96 database, and there's the link to it. Schedule 97, for those of you who are interested, are for qualifications approved for funding for learners aged 19 and over. And just as an aside, the database was named after Section 96 and 97 of one of the Education Acts. Remember, if it's not approved for funding, you can still deliver the qualification, but it's classed as non-qualification activity. And for the purposes of study programs, at least 50% of the program must be qualification, i.e. fundable qualifications. So do have a look, do check to make sure that qualifications, particularly new qualifications you're looking to deliver, are fundable. Check the qualification end date. Qualifications have a shelf life, and as such they will have an end date, and you or your data manager needs to be aware of when the end date is. And you hear of countless stories of schools and colleges losing funding because they do not know when the end date of the qualification is, and they register students after the end date or with insufficient time for that qualification to be delivered. And as a result, the student doesn't get the qualification and the organisation doesn't get the funding. So if you're delivering a 2-year course, make sure you have sufficient time left between the end date and the certification date in order to deliver that full programme. Once qualifications expire, they're removed from, or expired qualifications are removed from the funding calculation, so you won't be funded for it. Here's an example. Obviously, new BTECs, level 3 BTECs, the first sitting of those BTECs starts this September. So, for example, the BTEC Extended Diploma in Business, Extended Diploma in Sport, the 2-year level 3 programme, which combines externally set and assessed work plus internal assessments, is commencing in September. However, the Level 3, the existing Level 3 extended diploma, the QCF programs, the last registration is the 31st of December 2017. So, theoretically, you could enrol students this September 16, and you will have 2 years to deliver that program and it will still be funded. You could, if you so wish, register students in September 17, and then your certification date is likely to be 2019, summer 2019. So you've got 2 years in which to deliver that qualification, as long as they're registered with BTEC prior to the 31st of December 2017. Now, there are issues about those qualifications, the old QCF qualifications, not counting in performance tables. So that's a judgment that you need to make as a sixth form, as a school, as to what qualification is the most appropriate for your learners. But think about the viability of your classes. How many qualifications can be what we call lost leaders? Actually, it costs more to deliver that qualification than you get in terms of funding. Every teaching hour has a cost. And if we know this, then we know we can calculate how many students we need to break even, so that the amount it's costing us to deliver equals the amount of funding we're getting in. Do you know this? Do your staff need to know this? Is it relevant to you? Well, actually, I would say it is, because that will drive your recruitment. And if you know that you need to get 10 students on a course, if you've got 9, okay, is that okay? But if you've only got 4, it's still costing you the same amount of cost in terms of delivery, but you're not getting the level of income. Now, that may be okay because you might have 30 on another subject, so it balances it out. But you need to know this, and your bursars and business managers will be able to give you an idea of how much the cost per hour is. Now, it's not going to be 100% accurate because you will have different staff teaching part of their time in Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5. Staff will be on different salary bands and a whole host of other factors. But you will be able to work out, or your business managers will be able to work out, a rough cost. So, for example, here we've got some costs, hours per year, cost per qualification, cost per hour. So a typical teacher's salary, just an average salary, if there's 150 hours in an AS or A-level, in a 1-year A-level program, 150 hours, you can work out the cost per hour is about £91 per hour. The cost for delivering those 150 hours plus the additional on costs of which organisations have to pay, so it's not just staff salary, gives us about £13,700 to deliver that AS or 1 year of an A-level programme. So we know that roughly £4,500 is the study programme for a full-time student, so therefore the cost per A-level roughly £1,100. So you can work that out that you need 13 students. You actually need 12 point something students, but the point something is relatively difficult to achieve, so you round up. You need 13 students. That way you will get slightly more income than it does to cover, and it covers the cost of delivering that qualification. That's just a very rough example. It will be different from across your schools, okay, and also in different parts of the country. But your business manager will be able to give you a rough idea of how many students you need per course to break even. Now, if all your courses in the sixth form have sort of 4, 5 and 6 students on it, and you need 12 or 13, then your sixth form is likely to be making a financial loss. Are we under or over teaching? Now, full-time students are classed as students who are on programs of more than 540 hours per academic year, but we're actually funded for 600 hours, and that generates about £4,500 per learner. 700 hours is still full-time. We don't get any more funding for it. The only thing that's changed is the costs, because you're now having to staff 700 hours worth of curriculum rather than 600 or indeed 540 hours. So there's no additional money for overteaching, but the costs go up. If we're teaching less than 540 hours, students are part-time. And it's done within a band. So 450 to 540 is the next band below. And it's better to be at the bottom of that funding band than at the top. Because at the top of the funding band, if you're doing, let's say, the highest level of part-time is 450 to 540. If you're doing 530, you're getting the same amount of income as if you're doing 450. The only difference is the costs. And funding is actually calculated at the midpoint of that funding band. So anything below the midpoint is better than anything above the midpoint. Retention is one of the things you can influence as a sixth form. Students only have to remain on one core learning aim for you to retain the retention funding. Now, withdrawing, we said, can affect success rate. It says here the qualification success rate. I've kept that in because we know that the qualification achievement rate reports are coming. So actually, it's still good practice to bear that in mind. But the thing you need to think about is if you are withdrawing a student, does that then move them subsequently from a full-time student to a part-time student? Now, it may not impact you immediately in the first year because you're projecting forward, but it may impact you in the second year of their program. Withdrawing a student from the institution affects your retention rate, which will always or nearly always remove funding from your overall funding allocation. It's not applied per student, it's across the institution. Remember, retention is the retention factor which is used in the funding is the midpoint between your retention rate and 100%. So if your retention rate is 90%, the midpoint is 95, so the retention factor is 0.95. As that's less than 100, so 1.0, it will always remove funding from your funding allocation. So if we look at this example, thinking about just one student, average funding of 4,500, institutional retention rate of 0.95, takes the funding down to £4,275 for that student. Maths and English. Now this is the current guidance, and the current guidance is of April 2016. So the thing we need to bear in mind is that in funding terms and policy terms, it's quite a long time between April and September. So the caveat here is it's correct as of today. It may not be correct as of tomorrow. So the teaching of maths and English qualifications is a condition of funding for students who do not hold A star to C in these subjects and who are studying for more than 150 hours in an academic year. Okay, so if you're doing more than 150 hours and you don't have maths or English A star to C, you need to be studying for them. So full-time students starting their programme who have a D in GCSE or equivalent maths and English must be enrolled on GCSE provision rather than stepping stone qualifications. Stepping stone qualifications are still available in certain circumstances. If a student has a very low GCSE grade, or more commonly where a student has special educational needs and either has a statement or an EHCP plan. Any student where the condition of funding is not met will be removed from the lagged learner numbers in 2018-19. Okay, so going forward, students will be removed. And it's not just the maths and English portion of funding you're losing, it's funding for the entire student. And institutions will receive advance warning of this before their January student number statement is released. Now it says January 18, but it's actually impacts, the data they're using will be 16-17 data. So January just gone, your head teachers, your business managers received a letter saying how many of your students were compliant with maths and English condition of funding. And those who weren't, some of their funding will be removed. So going forward, you will not be funded for that student's entire programme. So if you have 120 in your sixth form and 10 of them are not compliant, then you will be funded for 110 students. So you need to be 100% sure that everybody that should be doing maths and English is doing maths and English. Okay? It's relatively straightforward if they are progressing from your year 11 into your year 12. However, what happens if they're progressing from somebody else's year 11 into your year 12? Are you 100% sure that they meet the condition of funding for maths and English? Okay, so here's the current guidance of what students should be doing. We've got English language on the left, English literature in the middle, and then what they should be doing going forward. High needs funding is something that continuously challenges us. It's important that certainly by this stage of the academic year, you should know exactly who is coming to you with education, health and care plan, and those dialogues with local authorities, with commissioning local authorities, are critical. Now there may still be some variation. You may not be 100% sure, because as all students, they will look at a number of alternatives for September, and depending on what they achieve, they may pick one or another of the options they have. But you should have a fairly clear idea who is coming into your sixth form with high needs funding. You cannot assume that you will get the same number of places for funding that you did last year. So the overall funding envelope nationally is still the same, but local authorities can move funding around and places around. So just because you got 10 places last year and they were filled by students from your home local authority and for neighbouring authorities, you cannot assume that you will get the same number going forward. So these early dialogues with local authorities through the SEN team, through your SENCO, are very important. Post-16 funding, they've indicated at the moment is likely to remain the same, £10,000 per place through the place planning allocation, and then additional top-up funding to meet the additional needs from the local authority. Okay, so you need to know exactly what those additional needs are, what needs to be put in place, and the cost of delivering that education. Okay, last couple of slides. Large programme funding. Do you know who your large programme learners are? These are learners who are doing particularly large programmes. And do you need to provide any support in order to secure that additional funding? So these are learners who've done 5 full A levels and achieved grade B or better across the 5. They will get 20% uplift, 4 10% uplift, and there's the details of the IB as well. And this is based on lagged data, so it's not students who are starting this September with you and who will be doing 5 A levels. This is done retrospectively. So if you do have learners, you get the full uplift in one payment. So if they've got the full 5 A levels at B or above, it's 20% per year, but you receive that in one payment. Large programs which are longer than 2 years generate no additional uplift. Okay, so just think about, do you know who they are? Do you have any learners? You may not have learners doing 5 A levels which are going to get grades B or better, or 4 A levels, but it's something to bear in mind. Okay, don't rush out to stick everybody on the 5 A levels because it's done retrospectively and they have to get B or above across all those A levels. Again, think about it. Will this impact on retention figures or value-added figures? Okay, and the students, the details are identified in the funding allocation statement that your school will receive. And the last slide is just communicate. Talk to your business managers, talk to your bursars. They're nice people, but what you do affects what they do, and what they do will affect what you do. And going forward with the reduction in formula protection funding, even if you do nothing, if you have the same number of students doing exactly the same curriculum in 2016-17, there is a high chance that for most of you, you will get less funding. So it's important to have that dialogue between business manager or bursar, head of SITH and teaching staff. Who is managing your data? Is it an administrator or is it an assistant or deputy head? Because post-16 is reliant on accurate data. It's no good having data that's 80 or 90% accurate. It has to be 100% accurate. Otherwise you're potentially missing out on funding. And the most common cause of lost funding, other than not recruiting sufficient students, is usually around a weakness in the robustness of the data, inaccurate data. So make sure you got the right student on the right course, do it undertaking qualifications that are approved for funding, and that you have sufficient duration left in the qualification, that you have good class sizes, you're not over or under teaching, you're maximising the funding, you're keeping them on the programme, you just have to drag them through to the end. Those who are doing maths and English are doing maths and English. You know who your high needs learners are and they're having the support. You know who your students on large programmes are, and if necessary the support is being put in for them, and you're talking to your staff. You're talking to the business manager, you're talking to your teaching teams and reminding them they cannot be making decisions around changing students on curriculum without your say-so. If you've got any questions on this, then please do email me and enjoy the rest of your day.